Finally. Hi, welcome to the channel. Today, I'm going to create a website in 24 hours, completely from scratch. No AI, no online resources, no templates, no reused code. And I'm going to let a random generator decide what type of project it is. Let's go check it out.
The tool I'm using is appideagenerator.com. I'll leave a link to that in the description of this video. After tapping a few times, the generator landed on
What the hell am I supposed to do with that? So I think I've come up with a basic concept. My idea is a web app that will generate stickers that visually indicate that you need a ride in some way, shape, or form that can be dropped into like any instant messaging software like WhatsApp, Discord, etc. I don't know how practical it will be, but based off the prompt, I think that's what we're gonna go with. So I'm gonna start drafting up some wireframes right now. See ya.
I opened up my professional paint tool and got started on wireframing. I always like to start on desktop since that's how I typically develop. I want the user to be able to see what their card is going to look like in real time. So I add a preview section, get an idea of how the navigation should be set up, as well as how the form should be laid out for the user to input. The idea being, as the form is filled out, the preview will update in real time. Now that I've got an idea as to how the tool is going to look, as well as function, I want to also ensure that this translates properly into the mobile site. My thoughts being that the mobile version should always have the preview box in view at all times, and without forcing the user to constantly scroll, being able to navigate to any section of the input form through a series of menu buttons that will dynamically change that aspect of the form. Now that I've locked down the design, I want to move on to a color palette. The mood that I want to go for is something comfy and kind of cute. I'm going to put the hex codes on screen for each one of these components. I like to apply these colors to my wireframe so that I can make any adjustments necessary before I spend too much time playing with it on the actual application. Now that we've got our palette, we can move on to the actual project. I'm using Next.js with a Postgres database that I can utilize in a Vercel deployment. Now that I have a project created, first thing I like to do is access the created globals CSS file so that I can implement the colors from my color palette. I also wanted to get my buttons created so that it's not something I have to tinker with later. I configured my root layout and then got started on the homepage. After a good amount of time later, I had my first iteration of the homepage, equipped with everything that I wanted from my MVP, including being able to modify the form that will automatically update the live preview, as well as having a couple of quick templates that you can then modify. I'll be utilizing local storage as a way to test these stickers until we deploy to Vercel and set up the database. And at this point, we are able to create these stickers. I did want to ensure that a QR code was generated, so I installed the QR code React package, and I implemented it into my ride card generator. And that worked pretty seamlessly. It does utilize the generated URL, so once this is on a live deployment, this QR code will have the live destination. From there, I wanted to ensure that downloading the card did work as intended. However, on my first test, the background color gradient was not utilizing the same colors as what was in the preview. So after a little bit of tinkering, I did come across this error, which was easily fixable by changing the default colors. So once I fixed that, the cards did show exactly how the live preview showed. Some of this text was hard to read, so I modified the defaults to ensure it was always legible. That did, however, give me an idea. Although I always wanted to allow users to modify the color of the cards, I figured multiple people would encounter unlegible text unless they were able to modify that themselves, so I added a color wheel to all components of the ride sticker. At this point, I am happy with the tool as well as the sticker generation, so at this point I do want to ensure that this is mobile friendly. Out the bat, it's not too bad. However, according to my wireframe, I did want to implement that sticky menu option. Although I didn't rip it straight from the light generator, I did use essentially the same principles. So now, if you're on the phone, depending on what button is clicked, will show which part of the form is shown on the screen at any given time. And now the core of the app is completed. So I pushed what I had up to GitHub so that I could deploy this onto Vercel and get the database set up. The reason I'm doing this now is so that I can start working on the user models, which I want to create on a live database to avoid future errors. However, I ended up with a bunch of errors straight out of the gate. I ended up spending about my last hour and a half trying to debug this, and after multiple iterations, I was unable to create accounts before I went to bed.
It is now 2 o'clock in the morning. I'm going to call it there. Figure if I wake up early enough, should be able to get at least another 7 hours. And I don't like going to bed with a bug in my console, but that's tomorrow's problem.
The next day.
So I did not wake up early. In fact, I woke up at about noon, which gives me about 5 hours left. I have a bug in the console, and I still have a lot to do. So we're going to get started.
This was easily the most difficult part of the entire project. I kept going down a rabbit hole, thinking that this had something to do specifically with how I was implementing account creation. Going through the logs did point me in the correct direction, since the repeated pattern was my project getting upset about the new Prisma client. And this is where I regrettably broke my rule of not utilizing outside resources. But I could not figure out why the Prisma client was giving me such a hassle. Reading through a few documents, I did find that the engine needed either an adapter or an accelerate URL. It also warned me about Vercel caching an outdated Prisma client. The core issue was that Prisma 7 changed how configuration works. You're not supposed to put URL equals environment database URL variable in the schema.prisma file anymore. And because I'm using Prisma Accelerate, Prisma needed to know about my connection URL in the prisma.config TypeScript file. So I cleaned up my schema and added a proper Prisma config that points at my Prisma data platform URL, simplified by my Prisma TypeScript file to use a normal Prisma client, and make sure Prisma client is generated through the build. After that, Vercel stopped complaining. Now that that's resolved, I am able to create accounts, so the next few steps were rather smooth sailing, or so I thought. Since I was using local storage to test everything, I now have to go through and change all of that logic to work with the live database instead. After doing so, I realized after creating a new sticker, there wasn't a form for anyone to fill out to offer the user a ride. So I added that form pretty quickly, but when I went to go test it, I ended up getting a 404. I went to check why that would be and realized that the time constraint was starting to get to me as I completely botched spelling the word offers. Once that was fixed, the form submission now works, and that was the last thing on my checklist. I deployed and started testing on the live site, and everything's working perfectly fine. You can now create stickers with or without an account. I will say though, if you create without an account, you most definitely need to save the link itself, because there will be no dashboard for you to easily navigate to your previously created cards. Due to the time limitations, there were a few features I wasn't able to implement. However, with a challenge like this, that is a pretty fair trade-off. If I had more time, I would have liked to implement an email feature to provide users with notifications when somebody submitted an offer. If you'd like to try the app out for yourself, go to ridesticker.dev, create an account, and enjoy.
Overall, that was a really fun challenge. If you want to try the app out yourself, there will be a link in the description below. If you like the video, go ahead and leave it a like. And if you want to see content similar to this in the future, go ahead and hit subscribe and ring the notification bell as well. In the meantime, I do have a video on how I made a light reference app, and I will put it right here. Until next time, thank you very much again.